Imagine the most secure prison ever constructed. There are no iron bars, no concrete walls, and no armed guards. Yet, escape is fundamentally impossible. Why? Because the prison is your own skeletal framework. You open your eyes, the ceiling of your bedroom is perfectly visible. You can hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the distant sound of traffic outside. Your mind is completely, undeniably awake. But when you try to lift your hand, nothing happens. When you attempt to scream for help, your vocal cords emit absolute silence. A suffocating weight presses down on your chest, as if the atmosphere itself has turned to lead. And then, from the deepest corner of the shadows, you feel it. A malicious presence slowly moving toward your bed. You are trapped alive inside a corpse that refuses to obey you. This is not a supernatural curse. It is a catastrophic communication error within the most complex structure in the known universe. Welcome to the terrifying reality of sleep paralysis, a biological glitch where your ancient brain architecture turns against your conscious self. Act 1. The desynchronization of the awakening mind. To understand the horror of sleep paralysis, we must first dismantle the illusion of sleep itself. We tend to view sleep as a simple binary switch. You are either awake or you are unconscious. But cognitive neuroscience reveals that sleep is an intricate, highly orchestrated symphony of shifting neurochemical tides. The conductor of this symphony is a network of neurons located deep within your brainstem known as the reticular activating system. Under normal circumstances, when morning arrives, this system floods your cerebral cortex with electrical signals and waking neurotransmitters like acetylcholine and norepinephrine. This process flips the conscious mind into an active state, while simultaneously signaling the motor pathways to regain muscle tone. It is a seamless transition, a beautiful evolutionary handoff between the world of dreams and the world of physical reality. But what happens when the conductor loses the sheet music? During an episode of isolated sleep paralysis, a severe desynchronization occurs. The reticular activating system abruptly fires its awakening signals into the higher cortical regions of your brain, instantly restoring full cognitive awareness. Your internal monologue boots up. Your sensory processing centers begin to analyze the environment. You register the geometry of your room. However, the lower brain structures, specifically those governing the motor output channels, remain locked in a profound state of deep sleep. This creates a terrifying neurological paradox. The conscious self is thrust back into the waking world, but the physical vehicle remains tethered to the chemical mechanics of the dream state. You are caught in a liminal zone, a biological no-man's land, where you are simultaneously 100% awake and 100% asleep. In the architectural history of human psychology, this state represents a profound structural failure, an instance where the evolutionary safety mechanisms designed to protect your survival become the very tools of your psychological torment. Act 2. Muscle, atonia, and the anatomy of the biological cage. Why does the brain lock the body down in the first place? The answer lies within a critical survival mechanism known as muscle atonia. Every single night, as you slide into the deepest phase of sleep, the rapid eye movement phase, your brain embarks on a highly vivid narrative journey. You fly through skies, you fight unseen enemies, and you run through shifting landscapes. Your motor cortex fires chaotic commands to simulate these actions. If those commands reached your limbs, you would physically act out every single dream. You would sprint into walls, injure your loved ones, or hurl yourself out of windows. To prevent this self-destructive chaos, evolution implemented a hardwired safety kill switch. Two primary neurotransmitters, gamma, aminobutyric acid, commonly known as GABA and glycine, are released from the brainstem. These chemicals travel down the spinal cord and bind to the motor neurons, effectively polarizing them and shutting down their ability to transmit electrical impulses to your skeletal muscles. Your body enters a state of somatic paralysis. Your fingers, your arms, your legs, and your jaw are completely taken offline. Only your eyes and your diaphragm, the muscle responsible for breathing, are spared from this biochemical lockdown. During sleep paralysis, you become acutely aware of this lockdown. When you wake up prematurely in this state, your conscious mind attempts to execute a basic motor command, such as lifting an arm. The frontal lobe generates the electrical intent. But as that signal travels down the spinal cord, it hits the chemical wall of GABA and glycine. The signal is entirely obliterated. The psychological consequence of this blockage is immediate and severe. In cognitive psychology, we understand that human sanity relies heavily on a feedback loop known as efference copy. When the brain sends a movement command, it retains an internal copy of that command to predict the sensory outcome. When your brain sends a command to move but receives absolutely zero sensory confirmation that the movement occurred, a massive cognitive dissonance tears through your neural networks. The brain panics. It interprets the total absence of physical response not as a temporary chemical delay, but as an existential threat. It feels as though your body has been physically restrained by an external force, or worse, that your physical form is dying. This mechanical failure of the efferent's copy loop immediately triggers the most primitive alarm system in human biology, setting the stage for an escalation of pure, unadulterated terror. Act 3. The rebellion of the amygdala and the fight, or flight paradox. When the cognitive dissonance of muscle atonia shatters your sense of safety, the neurological alarm system shifts from a state of confusion to absolute emergency. Deep within the temporal lobes of your brain lies an almond-shaped cluster of nuclei known as the amygdala. In the framework of evolutionary psychology, the amygdala is your ancient sentinel. It is the hyper-vigilant protector that has kept the human species alive for hundreds of thousands of years by scanning the environment for predators, hazards, and existential threats. Under normal waking conditions, if you encounter a threat, your amygdala instantly triggers the sympathetic nervous system. It floods your bloodstream with adrenaline and cortisol, accelerating your heart rate, dilating your airways, and shunting blood to your major muscle groups. This is the classic fight, or flight response. It prepares your body to either engage the predator in brutal combat or flee at maximum velocity. But during sleep paralysis, the amygdala fires into an entirely broken system. As the amygdala detects that the body cannot move, it misinterprets this paralysis as a sign that you have already been captured or compromised by a hostile entity. It panics. It releases a massive wave of stress hormones, ordering your heart to pound violently against your ribs and your lungs to gasp for oxygen. Your internal state becomes white, hot with survival energy. You are biologically primed to run for your life, and yet you cannot move a single millimeter. This creates the ultimate physiological paradox, an extreme, red-line hyper, arousal of the survival drive operating inside a completely immobilized physical shell. Because the brain cannot reconcile this hyperactivation with an empty, quiet bedroom, it falls victim to a cognitive phenomenon known as threat detection bias. The amygdala demands an explanation for the terror it is generating. It forces the higher-level cognitive centers of the cerebral cortex to scan the sensory input for any shred of evidence that justifies this level of fear. If no external threat exists, the brain will do something truly sinister. It will create one. To observe this mechanism in a controlled environment, we can look at classic neurological studies of hypercapnia and fear induction. When subjects are exposed to elevated levels of carbon dioxide or direct chemical stimulation of the amygdala, they experience an overwhelming non-specific sense of impending doom. When placed in a dark, ambiguous room, their minds instantly project their worst psychological phobias onto the shadows. During sleep paralysis, your brain is trapped in this exact experimental loop. The amygdala is screaming that you are about to die, and your conscious mind is forced to build a narrative around that scream. The utter helplessness of being unable to run or fight causes the amygdala's activation to loop back on itself, escalating the terror exponentially with every passing second, turning your own mind into an inescapable torture chamber. Act 4. The suffocating weight and the mechanics of illusion. As the AONG low end deepens, the physical sensations of sleep paralysis morph into something profoundly tactile and aggressive. The most common symptom reported across every culture on Earth is the agonizing feeling of a massive, crushing weight pressing down directly on the chest. Victims frequently describe it as a demon sitting on their sternum, a heavy stone block, or an invisible hand strangling their throat. This terrifying illusion is driven by a fundamental misunderstanding between your conscious perception and your autonomic respiratory mechanics. When you enter the REM dream state, your breathing patterns shift from voluntary control to automatic control, regulated entirely by the primitive brainstem. As mentioned earlier, while your skeletal muscles are completely paralyzed by GABA and glycine, your diaphragm continues to function normally, pulling downward to draw air into your lungs. However, normal breathing also relies on the intercostal muscles, the small muscles situated between your ribs that expand and contract the chest wall. During REM sleep, these intercostal muscles are taken completely offline by muscle atonia. When you awaken prematurely into sleep paralysis, your conscious mind attempts to take manual control of your breathing. you try to take a deep, voluntary breath. But because the intercostal muscles are still chemically locked, your chest wall cannot expand. Your chest feels rigid, unyielding, and completely restricted. The harder you struggle to inhale deeply, the more you fight against your own paralyzed thoracic cage. In psychology, this is an immediate trigger for hydrostatic panic. The brain senses resistance against the chest and immediately registers a lack of oxygen. It interprets the physical resistance of your own unmoving ribs as an external force pressing down from above. To make matters worse, this perceived suffocation feeds right back into the hyper-activated amygdala. The brain enters a catastrophic feedback loop. The lack of voluntary chest movement creates the illusion of an external weight. This illusion increases your panic. The panic causes your heart to beat faster, which demands more oxygen. But because you cannot expand your chest, the sensation of suffocation grows even tighter. Historically, this specific mechanical failure led to the creation of the incubus and Mara myths, demonic entities believed to lie on top of sleepers to steal their breath or paralyze their souls. Science demonstrates that this demon is entirely structural. It is the raw, unvarnished experience of your conscious mind crashing face, first into the autonomous, restricted breathing patterns of a sleeping body. You are not being suffocated by a monster. You are being suffocated by your own biological resistance to the dream state. Act 5. The intruder hallucination in the projective brain. When the mind is hyper-aroused by the amygdala and suffocated by the restrictions of muscle atonia, it executes its final, most terrifying trick. It populates the darkness. This is the phenomenon known in cognitive neuroscience as the intruder hallucination. Victims do not merely feel fear. They see, hear, and sense an absolute malevolent entity standing inches away from their face. To understand why the brain projects such vivid horrors, we must look at how human perception works. The brain is not a passive camera recording the outside world. It is a predictive processing engine. It constantly generates a controlled simulation of reality based on past experiences, expectations, and internal emotional states. When you are wide awake, your sensory organs, your eyes, ears, and skin, provide a continuous stream of real-time data that corrects this internal simulation, keeping it anchored to objective reality. But during sleep paralysis, this feedback loop is completely broken. Your eyes are open in a dim room, but your brain is still partially immersed in the neural architecture of REM sleep, where internal imagery is generated with maximum intensity. When the amygdala is screaming that a mortal threat is present, the hyper-activated parietal and occipital lobes are forced to synthesize an image to match that emotional reality. The brain combines the low-light visual data of your actual bedroom with the chaotic dream, generating signals of the REM state. It takes a coat hanger on the wall or a shadow in the corner and rapidly reshapes it into a terrifying figure. This is deeply tied to a concept in evolutionary psychology known as hyperactive agency detection device. In the wild, our ancestors survived by assuming that every rustle in the bushes was a hidden predator rather than just the wind. Missing a real predator meant death. Misinterpreting the wind meant nothing. Therefore, evolution hardwired our brains to overdetect intent and agency in the shadows. During sleep paralysis, this hyperactive agency detection goes into overdrive. Because you cannot turn your head to verify what is in your peripheral vision, your predictive processing engine fills that blind spot with your absolute worst nightmare. The brain projects its own internal state of terror outward, transforming an internal neurochemical glitch into a tangible breathing monster standing in the room. Act 6. Breaking the circuit. Triggers and prevention. If this phenomenon is entirely biological, what pulls the trigger that sets it off? Sleep paralysis is fundamentally a disorder of transition, a structural instability in the boundaries between consciousness and sleep. Neurological research indicates that the single greatest predictor of sleep paralysis is sleep deprivation and disrupted sleep architecture. When you deprive your body of adequate rest, you accumulate what scientists call a REM debt. The next time you finally close your eyes, your brain bypasses the lighter stages of sleep and plunges directly into deep, chaotic REM sleep to compensate. This erratic, high-pressure plunge increases the likelihood that your waking systems will misfire and activate while the body is still locked down. The second primary trigger is sleep posture, specifically sleeping in the supine position, flat on your back. Clinical studies show that sleep paralysis occurs up to 5 times more frequently when lying face up. This is due to a combination of mechanical and neurological factors. When you lie on your back, Gravity pulls the soft palate and tongue downward, partially obstructing your airway. This slight drop in oxygen saturation and increase in carbon dioxide triggers a sudden emergency wake-up signal from the brainstem. Furthermore, lying on your back increases the pressure on your vestibulocochlear system, making it much easier for the brain to experience spatial disorientation and terrifying illusions of floating or flying when you suddenly wake up paralyzed. By understanding these exact structural vulnerabilities, we can move from passive victims of this biological glitch to active engineers of our own sleep architecture. The next time you find yourself trapped inside the heavy silence of your own paralyzed body, remember this: the monster in the room is not a demon, it is just a mirror. It is a projection of a frightened, exhausted brain that woke up before its vehicle was ready. When it happens, do not fight the paralysis. Do not feed the feedback loop with panic. Instead, weaponize your knowledge. Focus your entire conscious intent on the absolute edge of your body. Try to wiggle your left big toe, blink your eyes rapidly. This small, concentrated motor command bypasses the larger locked pathways, sending a clear, undeniable electrical signal back up to your brainstem that the waking mind has returned. The chemical cage will dissolve, the shadow will vanish, and you will regain absolute control. Have you ever looked into the eyes of your own mind's shadow during sleep paralysis? Share your experience in the comments below, and let us break down the anatomy of our collective nightmares together. Don't forget to subscribe to Shadow Psychology DD for more deep dives into the cinematic architecture of human consciousness.